Imagine a city street in the early hours of a cold winter morning. The kind of morning where the air is still and the few people walking have their heads down, moving quickly, seeing nothing. A man sits in a parked car on a side street near an embassy. He has been sitting there for 11 hours. He has not eaten. He has not moved more than a few inches. A half-empty cup of cold coffee rests on the dashboard. He is watching a particular window on the fourth floor of a building across the street. He knows that in approximately 90 minutes, a meeting will take place inside that building. A meeting that could determine the fate of a foreign policy decision affecting millions of people. He has been building toward this moment for 7 months. 7 months of establishing cover, building trust, inserting himself into the right social circles, and waiting. And now, just 90 minutes away from the critical moment, something changes. A car he does not recognize pulls up to the building. 2 men get out. He has never seen them before. His pulse rises. Every instinct he has trained himself to suppress tells him to act, to call it in, to abort. But he does not move. He breathes slowly and deliberately. He watches. He calculates. He waits. Because he understands something that most people never learn in a lifetime. That in the world of intelligence, the one who acts first rarely wins. The one who understands what they are seeing and chooses the right moment always does. This is the world of espionage, not the world of fast cars and dramatic gunfights you see in films. The real world, the invisible world. The world where patience is not a virtue but a weapon. Where silence is not weakness but strategy. And where the most powerful thing a trained intelligence professional can do is absolutely nothing. And if that idea intrigues you, if you want to understand the psychological architecture behind some of the most successful intelligence operations in modern history, then stay with me for the next several minutes. This is a journey into the hidden mindset of spies, analysts, and intelligence professionals who shape world events without anyone ever knowing their names. If you find value in this kind of deep, investigative storytelling, please like this video and subscribe to this channel so you never miss content like this. Now, let us begin. Main unwrites our X1 the world, as most people understand it, is the surface. It is the news they read, the conversations they have, the events they can observe with their own eyes. But beneath that surface, there is another world. It has always existed alongside ours. It is the world where governments gather information about other governments, where strategic decisions are made years before they become visible, and where the most important battles are fought not with weapons, but with knowledge, patience, and psychological discipline. Intelligence work, at its core, is not about secrets. It is about understanding. The agencies that do this work at the highest level are not simply collecting information. They are building a model of reality that is more accurate than the one their adversaries have. And the foundation of that model is not technology, though technology plays a role. It is not money, though resources matter. The foundation is something far more human and far more difficult to develop. It is the capacity to observe without reacting, to wait without becoming anxious, to understand without revealing that you understand. Let us begin with a story. Story 1. The 8-month approach in the late 1970s. A Western intelligence operative was stationed in a major Eastern European capital. His assignment was to identify whether a particular government official was willing to cooperate with Western intelligence. This was not a simple task. The official was careful, well-connected, and surrounded by colleagues who reported on each other. Any direct approach would be catastrophic. So the operative did something that required immense discipline. He did nothing. For months, he attended the same social functions as the official. He sat at the same restaurants. He was present in the same orbit. He did not approach. He did not initiate. He simply observed. He noticed when the official was relaxed and when he was tense. He noticed the books the man carried. He noticed who made the official laugh and who made him uncomfortable. He noticed a subtle frustration that appeared when certain topics came up in conversation. He noticed all of this without ever making the official aware that he was being studied. After 8 months, the operative knew more about this man than his own family probably did. And when the moment finally came, when the operative identified a window of genuine vulnerability and genuine trust, the approach took less than 3 minutes. The official agreed to cooperate within 2 weeks, 8 months of patience, 3 minutes of conversation. That is the geometry of intelligence work. This story illustrates the first and perhaps most fundamental principle of intelligent psychology. Patience is not passive. It is the most active and demanding state a trained mind can occupy. In ordinary life, we tend to equate patience with waiting. We think of it as doing nothing while something happens on its own schedule. But in intelligence operations, patience is a form of sustained, active attention. It is the discipline of observing everything while revealing nothing, of processing constantly while appearing to do nothing, of building a comprehensive picture while your subject remains entirely unaware that a picture is being built at all. This distinction matters enormously when we try to understand why intelligence agencies, across cultures and across history, consistently produce professionals who possess an almost unnatural ability to remain still. They are still on the outside. Inside, they are working continuously. The psychological term for this is controlled vigilance. It is a state of high internal alertness combined with external calm. And the reason it is so difficult to develop is that it runs against the most basic human instincts. Human beings are wired for action. We are wired to respond to stimuli. When we feel threatened, we move. When we feel opportunities, we reach for them. When we feel uncertainty, we seek resolution. Intelligence training at its deepest level is training against these instincts. It is the deliberate cultivation of the ability to feel all of those impulses and choose not to act on them until the moment is right. This is sometimes described in intelligence circles as strategic patience, and it is one of the most powerful and least understood concepts in the entire field. To understand why strategic patience works so well, we need to understand something about how human beings reveal themselves. Every person, no matter how careful, has patterns. They have routines, habits, predictable emotional responses, and moments of lowered guard. These patterns are not obvious if you look at someone in a single moment. But if you watch someone over days, weeks, and months, those patterns become as legible as text on a page. The trained intelligence observer knows this. They know that rushing toward an objective activates the defensive mechanisms of the target. But approaching slowly at the pace of normal life allows those mechanisms to remain dormant. The target does not know they are being read, so they continue to behave naturally. And natural behavior, over time, tells everything. This principle is sometimes called the doctrine of the slow approach, and it applies far beyond espionage. It is the same principle that skilled negotiators use when they want to understand their counterpart before revealing their own position. It is the same principle that great therapists use when they allow silence to create space for the patient to reveal what they would not say if pushed. It is the same principle that the most effective business leaders use when they spend extended time understanding an organization before proposing any changes. In every domain where human behavior and strategic outcomes intersect, patience used as an active intelligence gathering tool consistently outperforms speed. Now, understanding the value of patience is one thing. Developing the psychological capacity to actually practice it is something entirely different. Intelligence agencies around the world have developed systematic approaches to building this capacity in their operatives. And the methods they use reveal a great deal about the psychology of strategic thinking. The first of these approaches involves training operatives to separate observation from interpretation. These are two very different cognitive activities, and most people conflate them. When you look at a person and immediately form a judgment about who they are or what they want, you have collapsed observation and interpretation into a single act. You have stopped seeing what is actually there and started seeing your theory about what is there. Intelligence training forces a wedge between these two activities. Operatives are trained to first observe without any interpretation at all. Just collect. Just see. The interpretation comes later, deliberately, with full attention. The second approach involves training operatives to recognize and manage the physical symptoms of impatience. Because patience is not purely mental, when we are waiting for something important, our bodies feel it. The heart rate rises. Breathing becomes shallower. Attention narrows. These physical symptoms actually impair the cognitive performance that long operations require. Intelligence training teaches breathing techniques, postural discipline, and attentional practices that keep the body in a regulated state even when the stakes are very high. The third approach is the cultivation of what might be called operational humility. This is the recognition that you almost certainly do not understand the full picture yet, that what you are seeing is partial and potentially misleading, that acting on incomplete information is one of the primary causes of operational failure. Operatives are repeatedly taught to ask themselves, "What am I not seeing?" before taking any action. This question alone has prevented more intelligence disasters than any amount of tactical training. 10 Habits of Intelligence Level Strategic THIN. Keon Gillidas now considered 10 specific habits and strategies that characterize intelligence. Professionals who operate at the highest levels of strategic effectiveness. The first habit is the daily practice of deliberate observation, not casual noticing, but the intentional study of a chosen environment. High-level intelligence professionals train themselves to enter any space and begin cataloging. Who is here? How are they positioned relative to the exits? Who is watching whom? What emotions are visible versus suppressed? This practice, done daily, builds the observational capacity that makes long-term intelligence work possible. The second habit is the maintenance of a strategic journal. Not a diary in the emotional sense, but a running record of observations, patterns noticed, hypotheses formed, and hypotheses revised. This journal creates an external memory that allows the operative to track patterns over long periods without losing detail. It also forces the discipline of translating vague impressions into precise language, which sharpens analytical thinking. The third habit is the practice of perspective shifting. Before acting on any interpretation of a situation, effective intelligence professionals force themselves to reconstruct the situation from multiple perspectives. What does this look like from the target's point of view? What does it look like from a neutral observer? What would someone who fundamentally disagreed with my assessment see? This practice prevents the tunnel vision that comes from committing too early to a single explanation. The fourth habit is emotional regulation through pre-planned triggers. Intelligence professionals who operate under high pressure learn to identify the emotional states that most impair their judgment. Whether that is anxiety, excitement, anger, or urgency, and develop specific, pre-planned behaviors that interrupt those states before they take control. A particular breathing pattern, a physical gesture, a specific question they ask themselves. These become automatic anchors that prevent emotional hijacking at critical moments. The fifth habit is the cultivation of a wide information network without dependence on any single source. This means maintaining a diverse range of informational inputs, personal contacts, analytical frameworks, and environmental observation channels so that no single source becomes the dominant lens through which everything else is interpreted. Dependence on a single source creates vulnerability, both in intelligence operations and in strategic thinking generally. The sixth habit is the practice of strategic silence. In conversation, in negotiation, and in information-gathering contexts, trained intelligence professionals use silence as an active tool. Silence creates discomfort. Most people fill discomfort with words. And the words people choose to fill silence often reveal far more than the words they had planned to say. The habit of staying comfortable with silence longer than the other person is one of the most powerful information gathering techniques available. The seventh habit is mission state maintenance. This is the discipline of keeping the primary objective of an operation clearly in focus throughout the duration of the operation, regardless of the distractions, provocations, and emotional demands that arise. Intelligence professionals who lose their mission state, who get drawn into secondary concerns, interpersonal dynamics, or reactive responses, almost always make the operational errors that compromise their objectives. The eighth habit is controlled exposure management. Every intelligence operative controls how much of themselves they reveal and when they reveal it. This is not deception in the ordinary sense. It is the discipline of not giving away information, including emotional information, before it is strategically useful to do so. In everyday life, most people reveal their interests, their reactions, their preferences, and their vulnerabilities continuously and automatically. Effective strategic thinkers develop the habit of making these revelations conscious choices. The ninth habit is the practice of adversarial thinking. Before any significant action, high-level intelligence professionals ask themselves, if I were trying to disrupt this plan, how would I do it? They play their own adversary. They look for the weakest points in their own strategy. They identify the assumptions that, if wrong, would cause the whole plan to collapse. This habit consistently improves the quality of planning and dramatically reduces the number of unpleasant surprises. The 10th habit is the discipline of operational debrief. After every significant event, whether it went well or poorly, effective intelligence professionals conduct a rigorous private review. What did I expect to happen? What actually happened? Where was my model of the situation wrong? What did I fail to observe? What did I observe that I failed to weight correctly? This habit of systematic self-review creates a feedback loop that accelerates the development of strategic judgment over time. These 10 habits, taken together, represent something much larger than a set of professional tools. They represent an entire orientation toward reality. An orientation built on the premise that careful, sustained, disciplined attention to the world produces better outcomes than fast, reactive, emotionally driven responses. This is the intelligence mindset, and it is accessible to anyone willing to do the work of developing it. 5 critical mistakes to avoid, but just as important as understanding what effective intelligence professionals do is understanding what they consistently avoid. Because the history of intelligence failures is, at its core, a history of predictable psychological mistakes made by otherwise capable people under pressure. The first mistake is what intelligence analysts call confirmation bias amplification. This happens when a professional who has invested heavily in a particular interpretation of a situation begins unconsciously filtering all incoming information through that interpretation. Evidence that supports the existing view is retained and elevated. Evidence that challenges it is minimized or explained away. In intelligence operations, this mistake has led to some of the most catastrophic analytical failures on record. It remains one of the most difficult biases to overcome precisely because it is invisible to the person experiencing it. The discipline of actively seeking disconfirming evidence, evidence that would prove your current interpretation wrong, is the primary antidote. The second mistake is premature action driven by the psychological discomfort of uncertainty. Long operations create sustained uncertainty, and sustained uncertainty is genuinely painful. The temptation to reduce that pain by taking action before the situation is fully understood is enormous. Intelligence professionals call this the pressure to close. It is the instinct to reach a conclusion, make a decision, take a step forward, simply because the state of waiting and not knowing has become psychologically intolerable. Operations compromised by premature action far outnumber those compromised by waiting too long. The lesson is brutal but clear. Sit with the uncertainty. Let it mature. Do not take action to relieve your own psychological discomfort.
The third mistake is emotional attachment to a source. This mistake is particularly insidious because it grows out of something genuinely positive: human connection. Intelligence operatives who work with human sources over extended periods naturally develop relationships with those sources. And those relationships create loyalty. The problem is that loyalty can override analytical objectivity. When an operative is emotionally attached to a source, they may resist the emerging evidence that the source is unreliable, deceptive, or compromised. The discipline of maintaining analytical separation from human sources, while simultaneously maintaining the trust those sources require, is one of the most psychologically demanding aspects of intelligence work. The fourth mistake is tactical focus at the expense of strategic awareness. This happens when an operative or analyst becomes so absorbed in the details of a specific problem that they lose sight of the larger context in which that problem exists. The person who is completely focused on one tree never notices that the forest is moving. Strategic awareness, the ability to keep both the specific and the general in view simultaneously, is a skill that requires constant cultivation and can be lost quickly under operational pressure. The fifth mistake is breaking cover under social pressure. In long-term intelligence operations that involve embedded identities, the most common cause of compromise is not clever adversarial detection. It is the operative's own psychological need for authentic human connection. Maintaining a cover identity over extended periods is profoundly alienating. The operative knows things they cannot say, has relationships that are not genuine, and must constantly suppress the natural human impulse to be truly known by another person. Under this pressure, operatives sometimes make small, seemingly harmless breaks in their cover that create vulnerabilities an alert adversary can exploit. These 5 mistakes are not the exclusive province of intelligence professionals. They are universal human tendencies that become magnified and potentially catastrophic when they occur in high-stakes environments. Recognizing them in yourself, in ordinary decision-making contexts, is one of the most valuable things you can take from the study of intelligence psychology. Story 2. The 18-month Casey. In the early days of a long and complex counterintelligence investigation, an analyst working for a Western agency became convinced that a high-ranking official within his own organization was passing information to a foreign power. The evidence was suggestive but not conclusive. The analyst could see the shape of the betrayal in aggregate data patterns, in the timing of certain operational failures, in subtle inconsistencies in reporting. But none of it was definitive. A senior colleague urged immediate action. Report it upward. Start a formal investigation. Contain the damage. The analyst refused. Not because he doubted his own judgment, but because he understood something critical. If the suspected mole became aware of the investigation before it was conclusive, they would go dark. They would eliminate their own trail, the investigation would produce nothing, and the damage would continue invisibly. So the analyst continued working. He did not confront the official. He did not change his behavior in ways that might signal suspicion. He continued to appear trusting, collegial, and unaware. Meanwhile, he was building the evidentiary case with extraordinary precision, one carefully documented data point at a time. 18 months later, the case was airtight. The arrest was clean. The mole never knew they were being watched until the moment the door closed behind them. 18 months of watching someone who did not know they were being watched. That is strategic timing. That is the patience that makes the difference between catching the truth and watching it disappear. The psychology behind this kind of sustained, strategic patience involves an understanding of something that behavioral scientists call deferred reward psychology. Most human beings have a strong preference for immediate outcomes over delayed ones. We want to know now. We want to act now. We want to feel the satisfaction of resolution now. This preference for immediacy is built deeply into our cognitive architecture, and it has evolutionary roots. In a world where threats and opportunities were primarily physical and immediate, rapid response was a survival advantage. But in complex, strategic, information-dense environments, this same preference for immediacy becomes a serious liability. The people and the institutions that can genuinely defer reward, that can tolerate extended periods of uncertainty and continue to function at high cognitive levels throughout those periods, consistently outperform those that cannot. Intelligence agencies learned this lesson the hard way, through historical failures that often trace directly to the inability to wait. And they built it into their training, their culture, and their operational doctrine. The result, when the training works, is something that looks almost counterintuitive from the outside. Professionals who become calmer as the stakes get higher, who breathe more slowly and observe more precisely when the pressure is greatest. who are most disciplined and most patient precisely at the moments when action feels most urgent. This is the psychological inversion that separates intelligence professionals from reactive thinkers. When ordinary people feel the pressure to act, trained strategic thinkers feel the imperative to observe. When ordinary people feel the need to speak, strategic thinkers feel the value of silence. When ordinary people feel that speed is the advantage, strategic thinkers understand that the first mover is often the most exposed. The intelligence mindset, at its deepest level, is not just a professional tool, it is a way of being in the world. Let us consider the specific psychology of surveillance, which is one of the most demanding and most misunderstood aspects of intelligence work. And the psychological demands it places on the observer are immense. Human attention is inherently unstable. It wants to move, it wants novelty, it wants stimulation. A surveillance operation requires the observer to maintain focused attention on an often monotonous target environment for extended periods, while simultaneously processing everything they observe with analytical precision, while simultaneously maintaining awareness of their own position and security. This is an extraordinary cognitive demand, and it is one that very few people can meet without extensive training. The training techniques that intelligence agencies use to build this capacity are fascinating. They include exercises in what psychologists call sustained attentional deployment, which is the practice of maintaining focused attention on a specific object or environment for gradually increasing periods of time. They include training in the differentiation between meaningful signals and background noise, learning to identify the specific types of behavioral change that indicate something operationally significant. Schedule. They are simply accumulated observations about how a system behaves over time. And they give the pattern recognizer a kind of predictive capability that can seem almost magical to someone who does not understand the underlying process. Human intelligence, what intelligence professionals call human, is a domain that draws most heavily on all of these psychological capacities together. In human operations, the intelligence professional is not just observing from a distance. They are building relationships with real human beings, relationships that involve genuine psychological engagement while simultaneously serving strategic purposes. The psychological complexity of this work is extraordinary. Effective human intelligence requires the operative to be genuinely present in their relationships while never losing sight of their operational objectives. They must build real trust while maintaining analytical distance. They must engage authentically while managing information precisely. They must be both fully human and strategically controlled at the same time.
Why human operations are among the most resource-intensive and risk-prone in the intelligence world. The psychological influence dynamics that operate in human relationships are worth understanding in some depth. Influence in intelligence contexts is not primarily about persuasion or manipulation in the conventional sense. It is primarily about the creation of conditions in which the other person wants to behave in a particular way. The most effective intelligence operatives are not people who tell persuasive lies. They are people who create environments of genuine trust, genuine understanding, and genuine mutual interest in which cooperation becomes the natural, self-motivated behavior of the source. This means understanding, at a very deep level, what the source actually wants, not what they say they want, what they actually want, the fears they are managing, the satisfactions they are seeking, the identity they are trying to maintain or construct. These are not always obvious, and they are often not what the source themselves would articulate if asked. But a trained observer, watching carefully over time, can develop a remarkably accurate model of another person's actual motivational architecture. And that model, used with genuine respect for the source as a human being, is the foundation of the most successful long-term human intelligence operations on record. Let us now consider the role of information itself in intelligence work, because it is different from how most people think about information. In the public imagination, intelligence work is about secrets, about finding out things that other people do not want you to know. And while that is part of it, the more sophisticated understanding is that intelligence work is about the meaning of information rather than information itself. The most damaging intelligence failure is not failing to collect information. It is failing to understand what the information you already have actually means. This distinction between information and understanding is one of the most important conceptual contributions that intelligence studies have made to the broader world of strategic thinking. Organizations that confuse data collection with intelligence understanding consistently make poor decisions because they are drowning in information while starving for comprehension. The discipline of moving from observation to pattern, to meaning to actionable understanding is the core intellectual process of intelligence work, and it is a process that requires patience at every stage. You cannot rush the observation phase without introducing blind spots. You cannot rush the pattern recognition phase without introducing false patterns. You cannot rush the meaning construction phase without producing brittle and oversimplified interpretations. And you cannot rush the translation into action without acting on understanding that is less complete than it needs to be. Every intelligence failure in history can be traced to a rush through one or more of these phases. Every intelligence success can be traced to the discipline of moving through them thoroughly. The behavioral signals that intelligence professionals are trained to read are not exotic or mysterious. They are the ordinary behavioral language that every human being produces every day. In every interaction, in every environment, changes in routine. Micro-expressions of emotion that do not match stated positions. Inconsistencies between verbal and nonverbal communication. Shifts in social patterns, including who someone is newly close to and who they have distanced themselves from. The timing and context of specific communications. These signals are available to anyone who has learned to see them, but most people simply do not have the attentional discipline to observe them systematically. The training of this capacity in intelligence contexts transforms the way a person experiences social environments. An intelligence professional in a room full of people is not socializing in the ordinary sense. They are processing a continuous stream of behavioral data. They are running hypotheses about the interpersonal dynamics in the room, about who is comfortable and who is not, about who is performing and who is genuine, about which relationships are under stress and which are stable. This processing happens simultaneously with normal social behavior, which means it is invisible to everyone in the room. The intelligence professional is both present and analytical at the same time. This capacity, once developed, is impossible to turn off entirely. Experienced intelligence professionals consistently report that they can no longer enter any social environment without beginning this kind of analysis automatically. It becomes the default mode of engagement with the human world. And while this can create a certain kind of loneliness, it also confers an understanding of human behavior that is genuinely rare. The role of emotional intelligence in strategic observation is worth emphasizing here, because there is a common misconception that effective intelligence work requires emotional suppression. This is not accurate. What it requires is emotional regulation combined with emotional literacy. The effective intelligence professional is not someone who does not feel. They are someone who understands precisely what they are feeling, can identify how that feeling is affecting their cognition, and can choose whether to act on it or set it aside. In fact, emotional literacy, the ability to accurately read the emotional states of others, is one of the most valuable tools in a human intelligence professional's kit. People who are emotionally expressive themselves are often the most sensitive readers of emotion in others, because they have a rich internal reference library of emotional experience. The training challenge in intelligence work is not to eliminate this emotional sensitivity, but to ensure that it serves observation and understanding rather than driving reactive behavior. Now, let us turn to the broader context of why intelligence work. and the psychological capacities it develops matters beyond the world of espionage itself. The strategic patience, the observational discipline, the pattern recognition, the emotional regulation, the adversarial thinking, the deferred reward psychology, all of these capacities that intelligence training cultivates are precisely the capacities that complex, fast-changing environments require. We live in a world of increasing information density where the gap between having information and understanding it is growing, where strategic decisions with long-term consequences are made under time pressure and uncertainty, and where the ability to remain analytically clear and emotionally regulated under pressure is a genuine competitive advantage. This is why the intelligence mindset, understood as a set of psychological and cognitive capacities rather than as a professional specialization, is increasingly relevant to everyone who operates in complex, strategic environments. Business leaders, policymakers, researchers, negotiators, educators, and any person who wants to understand their environment more accurately and navigate it more effectively can benefit from developing these capacities. The cultivation of these capacities does not require intelligence training in the formal sense. It requires the same thing that intelligence training uses: deliberate practice. It requires building the habit of observation before interpretation, the discipline of sitting with uncertainty without being driven to premature resolution, the practice of perspective shifting before acting, the commitment to systematic self-review, the cultivation of emotional regulation techniques that work under pressure. These are learnable skills. They have been learned by ordinary people throughout history, in many different cultural and professional contexts, whenever the nature of the challenge they faced required more precision, more patience, and more strategic depth than ordinary habits provide. Story 3. The decade portrait there was a woman, an experienced intelligence analyst who was assigned a task that many of her colleagues considered impossibly vague. She was asked to assess whether a particular foreign leader would remain in power over the coming decade. Not whether he would be overthrown in the next crisis. Not whether his current policies would succeed. Whether he would survive strategically over a decade. Most analysts would approach this question analytically, building models from available data. She approached it differently. She spent 2 years simply watching him, not his policies. Him, the way he spoke in unscripted moments versus prepared ones. The way he treated subordinates in public versus how those subordinates described him in private. The physical changes in his demeanor over time. Who was newly promoted and who had silently disappeared from his circle. She was not collecting policy data. She was building a psychological portrait. And when she finally wrote her assessment, she predicted with unusual precision not just whether he would remain in power, but the specific circumstances under which Hill's grip would begin to weaken. She was right. She was right in ways that data models had not been able to predict, because she had done something that data models cannot do. She had watched a human being think and feel and adapt and reveal himself over time in the unguarded, ordinary moments that tell the truth about who a person is. And that truth, accumulated patiently, was more valuable than any amount of formal analysis built on incomplete data. CONCOSCO-EON. This story brings us toward what may be the deepest insight that intelligence work offers to anyone willing to receive it. The world is not made primarily of events. It is made primarily of patterns. Events are the visible moments when patterns become undeniable. But the patterns themselves were always there, building toward those moments visible to anyone with the patience and the skill to read them. The operative, who waited 11 hours in the parked car on that cold winter morning, was not simply being patient. He was reading a pattern that was too slow and too subtle for impatient eyes to see. He was waiting for the pattern to complete itself, so that when he finally acted, his action would land in exactly the right place at exactly the right moment. This is the deepest meaning of strategic patience. It is not the absence of action. It is the accumulation of understanding through sustained attention, until the moment when action becomes not just possible, but inevitable. The patient mind does not wait for time to pass. It uses time. It transforms time from a neutral medium into an active resource. Every hour that passes is not time lost. It is another data point in the pattern, another confirmation or revision of the hypothesis, another increment of understanding that the impatient mind will never have. In intelligence, this capacity to use time as a resource is the difference between operations that succeed and those that fail. But it is also, in a profound sense, the difference between a life spent reacting to circumstances and a life spent shaping them. Because the person who can observe without revealing, wait without becoming anxious, understand before acting, and choose the right moment rather than the urgent one, that person is not just a better intelligence professional. They are a more powerful, more effective, more genuinely free human being. They are not carried along by the current of events. They are navigating. And navigation, in the end, is what all of this is about. Not the secrets, not the surveillance, not the operations. It is about the fundamental human capacity to understand the world accurately enough and to manage yourself skillfully enough that you can choose your direction rather than simply survive being moved. The invisible war that intelligence professionals fight, at its deepest level, is not fought against foreign powers or domestic threats. It is fought against the most powerful adversary any human being ever faces: the reactive mind, the mind that acts before it understands, the mind that speaks before it observes, the mind that reaches for resolution before it has earned it through sufficient patience. The intelligence professionals who win that invisible war are the ones who understand that the most powerful move is sometimes no move at all. That the most revealing question is the one you never ask aloud. That the clearest picture comes not from rushing toward it, but from letting it come into focus gradually, in its own time, through the sustained discipline of watching and waiting and understanding. That is the hidden mindset. That is the invisible advantage. And it is available to every person willing to pay the price that strategic patience always demands. The price is time, and the return on that investment is everything. If this documentary gave you something to think about, something that shifts the way you see patience, observation, and strategic thinking, please consider liking this video and subscribing to this channel. It takes only a moment, and it helps this kind of deep, investigative content reach more people. Share this video with someone you think would find value in it, and leave your thoughts in the comments below. The conversation that happens there is often the most valuable part of what we create together. DISCLIA Myanmar. This documentary has been created entirely for informational and educational purposes. All intelligence concepts, psychological principles, and strategic frameworks discussed in this video are based on publicly available academic research, historical records, and published works on intelligence studies and behavioral psychology. The narrative examples and stories used throughout this video are either based on broadly reported historical concepts or are illustrative fictional scenarios, designed to make abstract principles concrete and accessible. This video does not reveal, claim to reveal, or speculate about classified intelligence operations, classified sources, classified methods, or the specific operational practices of any intelligence agency. It is not intended to promote, facilitate, or romanticize illegal surveillance, unauthorized intelligence activities, or any form of harm. The psychological principles discussed here are presented in the spirit of education and the honest exploration of ideas that belong to the public domain of human knowledge.